first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming, because my wife's never going to believe that this many people want to listen to what I have to say. But here we go. So I'm Octaaf. I've been working at Larian for 16, 17 years, I think. I started in QA, went on to do some production, some release management, and now I'm back in QA as head of QA, and specifically for Baldur's Gate 3. Now, why did I name this talk BG3 Permutations? It's to give context to what we did to test and release the game of such a large scope. And to put that into context, I'll try to go over some of the things we had to cover. So for example, you had single player, split screen plus one player, two players, then multiplayer, two player, three player, four player. And within that, you also had controller and keyboard and mouse, so that was a split within those. We then had the platforms that we had to cover. So Steam Deck, PC, Steam GOG, Mac, PS5, Series S and Series X. And LSSM is our in-house tool, actually, that we use to do source control and the executable, so basically running the game on loose files if you really want to do something quickly. So that was all being covered by QA. Then we had the difficulty. I don't know which one, if you played BG3, is your favorite, but we had to cover all of them. So this is all part of the permutations. Then the avatar origins, your companions, even like having hirelings or having none at all. Body type, identity, and race subrace had a lot of impact on cinematics. We had classes, subclasses, multi-classing. Then we had the playthrough paths, which we tried to cover basically anything permutation narrative-wise, which we had to define to get something like all the game coverage that you could do, like going back and forth, the camp moments and everything. We had the 3 APIs, of which we released 2. So we had DirectX 11, DirectX 12, and Vulkan. We had 15 languages, but a lot of that was offset by our Loka producer called Nilton. So he was also organizing Loka QA, which helped offload gameplay QA. Then we had the Mac and its APIs. So all of those things were part of the scope of BG3. And on top of that, we noticed early in the playtesting phase that people were taking about 2 to 3 weeks, so 100 plus working hours to finish BG3, which was immense and wouldn't work if you were doing it as one playtester in one time zone, because it just takes too much development time to get any kind of feedback. So that the amount of permutations, the playstyles, edge cases, the systemics of the game is enormous. So how are we going to tackle that? We also kind of split, from a QA point of view, in any case, the two things between game coverage and player behavior. The distinction between those two is very important. Maybe people working in QA understand that. What we look at game coverage from a QA point of view is if you look at a game or software and you think, these are all the paths that I have to cover to do everything once, that's game coverage. But then you have player behavior, that's something completely different. Because you can look at a game and play the game and think, I've covered everything. But then as soon as players start playing, they start breaking all sorts of things that you never thought about. So the distinction is important. At Larian, I'd like to also mention that over the course that I've worked there, and as we've evolved, all teams have helped uphold the quality bar. And what I mean by that is, maybe there's several people of our team here, so you can ask them about it for your discipline if you're not working in QA. They have started adding workflows and procedures into their teams so that the end result of what ends up at the QAs on their plate is already at a high level, so that we don't have to deal with all the blocking problems or other issues that we used to have to deal with in the past. So that keeps increasing and is very helpful. It offloads QA a lot. This goes hand in hand with closer cooperation between the QA team and dev team, so we're more and more embedding people inside the QA teams, which I'll show you a bit later, and this really helps with efficiency and turnaround time. I'm QAing the button right now, okay. So how do we tackle scope? So from Larian Studios, we have, I don't know if you saw it in Sven's talk, actually, we have different time zones, different studios. So the way the QA cycle works is it starts in Kuala Lumpur, then is handed off to the Europe time zone, and finally ends up in Quebec. So we use the time zones to our advantage. We hand off work where possible, so not all work, but a lot of the QA work can be handed off. We balance and spread our QA team over the 3 time zones, and then you can see that 16 to 20 working hours a day versus the 100-hour playthrough helps a lot. So we can cover it. A QA can cover it in a couple of days with handing off over work instead of over 2 weeks or more. I don't know where to aim to go to the next one. All right. So we set up this team structure per team per time zone, and the overall team structure is also important, and the build pipeline, because you need to take into account that so the balance of the team is very important. So we try to aim to have 12 to 14 team members in each time zone so that work can be handed off efficiently. We also try to have a balance of junior to senior so that seniors can help train juniors, and it keeps the team fresh. So due to being in a different time zone and having to scale up quickly, each lead within gameplay QA is about 5 to 7 team members to manage. This is very important. I'll try to come back to that later when we're scaling up at the end of a project. Our full build pipeline runs at the end of the day in Quebec, so that it currently takes about 2 hours to make a PC build, I think. But in total, to do all the platforms and everything, it takes about 3 to 4 hours just to build. Then you still have the deployment times to the teams. So it's quite a bit of a chunk, and we use that to make the full build overnight so that it's ready for the KL team in the morning. They go over the build, and by the time our Europe development team comes online, they have the new issues of the build by the time that day starts. It was a very comparable setup, actually, to back in the DOS 2 days, but what we did back then was mostly like manual end-user verification. And at the beginning of the BG3 project, we then started adapting what we needed from the QA team to the needs of the project and the scope of the game. So here we go with a bit of a history of the project then. Back in 2019, we were still in pre-release. This is all from a QA point of view, by the way. So we had a team size of about 25 people. At that moment, we decided to add tech QA to the team. This was very necessary because we were still dealing with a source control issue where we had 3 different branches going from like a development branch to beta branch to stable branch, and everything would come together on the beta branch. QA would go over it. This was very time consuming, and it was blocking a lot of features reaching the actual developers. So Tech QA stepped in, removed the beta branch from that workflow, and they basically started testing all the programmer changes or the bigger changes in different feature branches. They would approve them, and then they would go straight to the stable branch, which saved a lot of time and was more efficient. So they've been there from the beginning of the project. At the end of the project, they were actually a team of about 8 to 9 people, I'd say. We went into early access release with about a team of 30 people. COVID hit also in 2020, which was not easy. Everybody was working from home, and that delayed quite a few things, also for QA. We had the EA release in October, if I remember correctly. Then we had a lot of hotfixes and patches for some unforeseen problems. The support team was overwhelmed because we had misjudged the amount of tickets that would be coming in because of the success of the game. We also were dealing with Stadia submission. I don't know if most of you remember, but we were one of the first games on Stadia, and we were one of the first games in early access on Stadia. And this was very difficult because it was basically being handled as a console, so we had to deal with submissions and requirements and everything. Sorry, let me go back. So in the second year of early access, things were still moving quite slowly, and we were a bit behind, but we were used to the release cycle because that's how we've been doing our previous projects. We have like 3 to 4 month big patches and hotfixes in between. In year 2, we added cinematics QA because it was a big focus of Baldur's Gate 3, obviously. So we improved the cooperation with the cinematics team and started training people to deal with that specifically. Then the next year, it was like the first step in scaling up for release. We added automation QA to deal with some of the scope because Act 2 and Act 3 were being added, and we needed better iteration time or better, faster results when a new build was ready to see if the game was fully playable or not. We added the support team within the QA team, which might seem like a not standard decision, but it turned out well in the end because we were trying to avoid the issue at EA release. We still had 4-month release cycles, and console versions were being added into 2022. Then we went into release. We had a staggered release for PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, and the team grew to over 110 people internally. Stadia shut down in the beginning of the year, which was a bit easier for us because we didn't have to deal with it for full release. We added playtesting, but that was already happening kind of at the end of 2022, and some of the playtesters actually stayed on to help us out as temp QA. We had console submission, and we upskilled support right before release. So I'll try to go into why we did the things that we did, and we adapted the team towards the project. So again, Tech QA, we added them early. This is actually a slide from our Tech QA leads presentation we did in the middle of the production of BG3. So the main supporting pillar of the programming teams is what Tech QA are. They're efficient and thorough testers because they also end up approving or disapproving the things that the programmers submit to their feature branches. So if they say something doesn't go, it doesn't go to stable branch, they have to fix everything. Sometimes that still ends up being a slow process, but it's the right balance between getting features to developers quickly enough without having too many things in between. They're also the first line of support for other departments, so if they have questions or issues with the editor or other tools, they go to Tech QA usually. They're experts in the in-house engine tools and workflows. Some of the requirements for Tech QA internally in the company are basically having quality assurance experience already, having some basic understanding of programming, and knowing other game engines is always a big plus. And then I want to mention something that we have going on in all the subdepartments of QA is that we try to, so our release our cycles for the projects are quite big. So Tech QA started over 5 years ago. So they try to maintain and upgrade or improve efficiency all the time. So they added automation somewhere in the middle of the project. This is an example of, I don't know if this is going to play now. No. Should be playing a movie. Tech support? Tech support? No, it doesn't seem to want to play. But anyway, what it shows here is basically there are automation tools already on the market. We were using Test Complete. It runs through, in this case, our Larian account creation process automatically, so offloading gameplay QA again, so to not have to do it manually. But it was being used also for the in-house tool, so the editor. And it's not just that, so automation was added. The Tech QA team did things like adding a screenshot capturer automatically on our QA portal because there was a demand for certain teams, not just the art team, to have periodic screenshots of the game to show the differences in art that they were making, or even in cinematics or different locations. It would automatically compare if there were bugs being detected. So for example, if the area all of a sudden was black or there was a big contrast change, it would flag it automatically. But mostly, I think, in the end, artists were using it to check how things changed over time. So it was very easy to say, like, this is how the game looked in that location 3 months ago, and this is how it looks now. In the end, during the release period as well, I don't know if our engine team is here, but when we were close on time, so we were pressed for time, they adapted the workflows so that they would have a Tech QA light pass, because sometimes Tech QA would take quite some time to get a feature into production, and we were running out of time, so they adjusted their workflows to and changed the communication with the engine and gameplay team to get things quicker into stable branch, but always with the communication in hand, because you can't just rush things through to the developers, because that affects stability. In 2020, we went into early access release. The release itself was successful, but in the background, so tech support was overwhelmed. Publishing and QA had to help out and step in. We had many hotfixes and patches initially to fix a number of unforeseen issues. We had a large amount of feedback coming in that needed filtering and processing. Stadia was still happening, so we had that added to the console release. We were basically in constant release mode as well, so we were trying to catch up. It was a difficult first year, trying to fix structural problems and still dealing with COVID. In the second year of early access, we started up the cinematic QA specialization. was a slide that was shown in Sven's presentation as well. So the cooperation between the cinematics team and QA team needed to be very good because we didn't have this knowledge inside our team. It was the first game with cinematics like this, so they needed to be trained, and the cooperation with the cinematics team helped achieve that. So the couple of patches we put out in that year resulted in some before and after shots being published on the Steam store page, which were trying to showcase the end result of what the cinematics would look like, even though there were still a lot of changes being made after this. So training the QA team to catch the right issues was definitely a big part of that. The year after, 2022, we added automation QA because dealing with the scope of the game was important to get the turnaround time we needed. If a build was ready, we needed to know if the game was playable from start to finish quite quickly. Otherwise, it would take days before anyone would flag a blocking problem. We also added the support team to the QA umbrella to prepare for full release, and I'll try to explain why a bit later. So ramping up to full release, adding automation QA. I hope this movie can play, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to show the context. Yeah. Could you try to play the movie, or? Yeah. Okay. It's a Google Drive link, so it doesn't work. Well, I tested it on my machine. See, that's. As a bit of context, this is one of our senior QA. He is currently in this movie that's not playing. He's fighting the world tester that's a very early prototype of the world tester back in DOS 1 and Dragon Commander days. It was running very basic tests like teleporting through the level and then opening and closing UIs, and the programmers were so convinced that it was so stable because it had been running for days that there were no issues, but QA kept complaining about controller issues and crashing the game, and so we did a one-on-one shootout of the manual QA against the then very early world tester. Within a couple of seconds, the game crashed, and Bert, our technical director, is actually off to the side of the screen here. He couldn't believe that he was making it crash within a couple of seconds because basically the input layer of the controller wasn't being caught by the world tester, so it was doing all the things, but it wasn't doing the actual button presses of the controller. So it was a funny moment back in the day. It evolved the framework to something which is even more unfortunate that we can't show. This is a movie of the automation running from beginning of tutorial of BG3 to the end of Act 1, which was a very big milestone within the gameplay automation QA team. So at the bottom, you can actually see what the gameplay QA automation team is writing in the script. So the text on the top is what pops up above the NPC's head, because it shows what it's doing in the game. So it's making sure Lae'zel's recruited and Astarion is the leader, and then it's asserting that back, so we know it actually happened within the scripting language. So what they were doing is basically writing an entire player playthrough in a script, and it would run through the game automatically as soon as the build was ready. This helped us a lot with the scope and the turnaround of the game, because people were still constantly making changes. Sven was still requesting changes to the narrative very, very late into the game. So we we were always catching up, so that's what the point I'm trying to make. The changes usually broke the scripts, but Gameplay QA was fixing them quite quickly. Once the content log came in and things were stable, then this was really a very helpful tool to know for QA and the rest of the teams that a build was playable, basically. So it was key in tackling the scope of the permutations for BG3. They also kept evolving, so they came quite late into the project, but eventually we had cinematics videos for systemic issues as well, which was something Sven pushed for in the end, because we had quite a bit of issues near the end of the production. We still want to improve that system because it's not where we want it to be. Where we want to end up is that cinematics QA can actually see on our QA portal a video that's being automatically captured by the game, so that they don't even have to set up the scene inside the game anymore. They can just go to our QA portal, click on the video for that specific scene, review the cinematic on the portal, and see the issues that are there, right, with everything on the screen. I think I will be able to show that. So all the debug outputs for the video is in the screen, so if you make a Jira from this movie that's generated by the automation script. All the information is there. You even have like things like the cinematic artist or the assigned writer, so you can ask them questions if something's not as it's supposed to be and everything. So it has all the information available right now, and you don't have to start up the game, set up the scene, so it saves a lot of time. We also used it for writing scripts for how to reproduce issues right after release, because we were running into some problems that I'm sure you all know. It happens 1 in 20 times, 1 in 50, 1 in 100 times. So being able to write scripts specifically for reproduction was very helpful after release. We also added UI support not that long ago, which helped us do things like character creation finally, that we could write automation tests for that. What we also did was add the support team to the QA umbrella. So we hired a support lead internally to build up the knowledge base and start an onboarding process. And we had to work with third party to scale up quickly because we had no idea. We had some forecasts about how many tickets would come in from players, but we had no idea how many would actually be there. So we had no choice to use third party to scale up there easily. Why did we do that? Because I'm not sure how structures work in other companies, obviously, but tech support is usually separately. I believe that all of the issues coming from QA support and the community teams, which is in our structure part of the publishing team, they report the same kind of issues. They report player feedback and they report issues with the game. So all that has to be filtered anyway by a central entity, otherwise you get a lot of duplicate information. So we added the support team in the QA, and we added basically processes to help speed up communication between tech support and QA. This helps a lot because what we try to do is when we release a big patch with our internal 24-hour cycle, what we try to do is we release a patch, and by the next morning we need to know what the biggest issues are, so our team of developers in Europe can start fixing them, and we can issue a hotfix the same week or as soon as possible. So release itself, we had a staggered release in 2023. So I know Sven skipped over it in his initial talk. So we first had a release date in September, which was going to overlap with Starfield. So it was moved to the beginning of August, which was both an advantage and a disadvantage because we had to move the release up, which is obviously not something you ideally want to do. But we are a company that has always traditionally released PC first and then console. So PS5 came in September, but it gave us a window. I know if you're releasing in September, you already have to do submission and everything way up front. But it gave us the extra month to prepare a 0-day patch, actually. So in the end, it worked out quite well for us. We had Xbox in December, which was some of you will probably know the reason. It was related to the Series S and split screen and memory issues we were having, so it was delayed until September, and it was not the best release that we had even then, so it was delayed and staggered, and it put a lot of pressure, I'd say, on the QA team to do this kind of staggered release because we had 3 major releases on 3 major platforms over the course of several months. It was a long release cycle. Now, how did we end up with over 110 people, you might ask? The last year of development, so before release, we started with playtesting somewhere, early playtesting was in 2022, and then it scaled up a lot by the end of 2022 and into 2023. We had sessions of 4 weeks initially for playtesting. We had our 6 studios where we could add 6 to 8 people depending on the availability of like rooms and computers, obviously. So we ended up with 45 plus people internally doing playtesting every 4 weeks initially. And that was the playtesting part. So this part mostly generated game feedback, which was going back to all the different development teams. And once this was wrapped up, we actually used this group of people, which was way more than 45 people because it was cycling every 4 weeks. We selected the best playtesters there that could help us finish the game and added them in our temp QA pool. So we had them on board for, I think, about 8 to 9 months, overall studios. And this is why I mentioned earlier that the QA leadership and even some of the senior team helped out with organizing all of this because adding, like doubling your team capacity within internal studio was not easy to manage. So they evolved into temp QA. We also did the support upscale, but that was easier because we had the right preparation for it this time. So 3 internal people and 15 external people. So I know this is a lot of text. I'm very proud that I made this myself and didn't use ChatGPT to generate my slides. But this is the end result. So how do you tackle permutations? So you start QA as early as the development workflow allows. You break everything up into smaller chunks, but you have to be careful not to lose sight of the overview. Start getting the main storyline stable, so the golden paths first, if your game is very narrative heavy. So you try to initially cover what 90% of the player base will do from gameplay point of view, so cover what most people would do first, and then expand into branching storylines, edge cases, and everything. So trusting but verifying internal pipelines selectively was very important in our case. The build pipeline is very complex. It takes a lot of data. The game is, I think, 130 to 140 gigabytes. So it's not just build pipelines, it's IT infrastructure as well. So DevOps and IT are usually teams that we work with very closely. But what I mean with verifying internal pipelines selectively is we sometimes have to make assumptions because we have a lot of data to cover, we have a lot of platforms, we have a lot of builds, but you have to do that selectively and rethink every time in view of the next release what you need to cover the most and what you need to cover best, because you can't trust data sets or builds all the time. We had some issues actually that went live for hotfixes because something changed in the build pipeline and we were making assumptions of like this executable or this data set was already tested, so we're going to ship it, but in the end that didn't prove so good sometimes. Over the most part it went okay, but you still need to be careful there. Then we add permutation testing on a layer on top of all of this that I mentioned before, again trying to cover what players will choose first. So we had a permutation tracking document. We also used analytics from DOS2 and from BG3 early access to figure out what most players were doing most of the time so that we knew what to cover first. And then some advice at the end is if you can't cover everything, you can vary your coverage between builds, release cycles, and also obviously focus on the areas of the game that have recently changed. This is an example of the permutation document that we have. So anytime a tester would start a new playthrough, so either a temp QA, internal gameplay QA, anyone basically starting a new playthrough, they would fill in a line in this document, but the good thing that our producers in QA added actually is that if you didn't have a specific assignment for a playthrough, if you would fill in the line, it would always select the least used option from all of the options before, so that in the end you end up with a lot of coverage, so that people wouldn't always select the same things. So that helped with permutation tracking. We also added in the QA portal, which is a tool that we have where everything is like gathered like performance benchmarks and everything. So we also had a section for crit paths that was added, which helped a lot with adding all the new people, because even if you play through BG3 once, you might not know the different variations or what to do to get to a certain step of a quest. So this is part of the game QA coverage that I was mentioning earlier. We added playthrough paths inside the QA portal where people you assigned a playthrough path basically to a tester. And what they would see on their end, if I can go to the next slide, they would see the execution part. So this is what that looked like. So it had a description on the top left that said things like the main avatar must be a Gith avatar. You have to have Lae'zel, Gale, Shadowheart in your active party. Total 6 origins were used in the playthrough, when it started, when it finished, and also the tester would have to go through each steps and say like, ignore us in the tutorial. Lae'zel's recruited, she dies in combat. So those were part of the permutations of the game coverage part that we were trying to do, which is not part of the player behavior or ad hoc testing. But this gave us an overview of what was already tested in a certain build, so it was a very useful tool. It was also very useful for the people that were new and didn't always know what to do to get somewhere. So where did we end up? The work scope of the team went from mostly manual gameplay and user testing in the DOS2 era too. We added tech QA, we added the focus on cinematics with the gameplay QA team, we added automation sub-department to help with the efficiency and turnaround. We added a large team of playtesters and temporary QA focused mostly on the feedback and playthroughs. We absorbed the support team and grew it for release. So that's where we ended up. And what did we learn from all of that? So the main responsibilities of the team also evolved during the project. So in-house support to dev teams is something that was not mentioned yet, but we have like a Gen Help channel basically on our Slack where people will post issues all the time, and then Gameplay QA or Tech QA would take a look into the issues, because not all issues obviously come from QA. We were the player voice throughout development, both before, during release, during early access, and then after release. Because of the cooperation with QA, tech support, the playtesters, and everything, we supported and maintained the release schedule for over 4 years, because it was a very long cycle of every 3 months, adding patches during EA and afterwards. We did the release management on different platforms, so submission, age ratings, and everything like that. We handled the player support going into and after release. And so what did we learn? We learned to always adapt the team to the project-specific needs. So when we start on a new project, we'll evaluate that again. You automate where you can and where it makes sense to gain the most efficiency and turnaround. You try to build knowledge and workflows pipelines beforehand, which is a harder lesson that we learned running into organizing playtesting and the automation. It was breaking new ground several times, so we'll try to improve that next time. Same with the support. Coverage, look at what most players would do first, and structure the team in a way that it can quickly scale up, which in our case most likely will be the same for the next project. Embed QA in key teams that control the more complex content. I think several of the other teams in other companies, at least from the people that I was talking to in the last 6 months, are going in that direction to have people in level design or in art or cinematics or the key features of the game, basically, to build up specialization and to raise the quality bar for QA, basically. What do we still need an answer to? We have been trying to get better at collecting and processing large amounts of data correctly. So I have some stats at the end, actually, that cover this, because what do I mean by that is we have a large amount of playtesting and game feedback coming in during the last year of development, basically, and processing and filtering all that correctly was a very big challenge. Obviously, there are tools that can help with this now, but you need to be very careful with processing data like that, because it's very easy to interpret it incorrectly if it's coming from players, so you need to make the right conclusions, basically. We also have a large amount of data in the support issues that are coming in, and we're still trying to figure out how we can best do that, because what we basically are looking for is we release a patch, several thousand tickets come in. By the next day, we need to know what the highest priorities are for our dev team to fix, and usually this goes okay, but sometimes something falls through, and we'd like to have an automated procedure there to tell us what the highest priority issues are. Then some stats, which I added only for convenience, because I wasn't sure if I was going to rush through this presentation or not. So there's some random statistics here for you. This might be interesting. This is how the team was divided throughout the project. So it's mostly a snapshot of what we were doing at the end. So we had 9 tech QA, 5 gameplay automation QA, 3 cinematics QA, which were scalable inside the team, because we took people from the pool of the gameplay QA, sometimes to help out with cinematic QA if there was a big spike in workload. Then we had the playtesting, which evolved into temp QA eventually. And then we had player support, which ended up in 113 people. But I want to take this moment to pause here and think. You might look at the number and see like that's a lot of people already, 113 people, but the people testing internally was actually a lot more. We had a strike team, for example, which Sven was organizing within the team with the people that had most understanding of the narrative consequences in the game. So they were rushing through the game with cheats and with setups of playthroughs that they wanted to test specifically because they worked on the origin, or they were having a specific goal in mind, trying to cover the game and doing it quickly with cheats within, I think, 1 or 2 days. And that helped a lot because, again, iteration time was had to be very low to fix the issues, and tackle the scope of the game again. And not only that, even within those people, so that I think it was about 8 to 15 people that were regularly doing that. We also asked the dev team at the end of the project to, if they were running out of high priority tasks, to help out with playing the game, generate feedback, generate issues. So we had a pool of over 400 developers at one point that could play the game if they had the time, and that definitely helped out with looking at not just the game coverage, but the player point of view, because they were playing it like players for the first time, some of them. So in the end, it was a lot more than those 113 people that helped with the QA effort on the game. Some other stats. So in the end, we had 74,000 total issues in Jira of the type bug, which is not everything. It doesn't include internal feedback, and it doesn't include any of the task planning, because we do a lot more on Jira than that. The processing sheets for all the teams from the playtesters had over 7,000 issues in it, because this was a list that was being generated so quickly, which is why I mentioned the thing that we're still trying to tackle. So much feedback was coming in that all of the producers of all the development teams had to step in and look for issues that would even bypass Jira. So if there was a quick fix that somebody could do in a couple of minutes, this would end up in the sheet. The producer would say like, okay, let's still do this, or let's not do it, because it could have an impact on the waterfall development. So there were quite a few issues in there for most of the teams. There was monthly written feedback, Word docs of over 200 pages from those playtesters and other sources, which was very hard to get the right feedback out of, so it was just too much to cover. In the end, we had over 10 million crash dumps collected on our PC, Stadia, and Mac, so it doesn't include PlayStation 5 and Xbox, because they have their own dump collection system. But this is the one that we used to track basically our crash rate for BG3. Since launch, we've had 6 major patches. We had 25 hotfixes, so the release schedule was quite tight always, but it was always, we were already quite into it because we've been doing it for quite some time for different projects and during early access and everything. So yeah, that's it. And we are hiring, so if you're interested, go to larian.com/careers. There is some positions open there already. There might be some QA positions on there quite soon, actually, because we do want to expand here in Warsaw. Thank you for your attention. Are there any questions?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for the lecture. That was amazing. With the statistics that you shared and the sheer number of issues you guys were dealing with, I wonder, would you be able to share some insight from the production side? How was your cooperation with the production team looked like? And how, like, what methodology did you choose to actually prioritize the issues that you were having?
So we have 2 QA producers, and we have a team of over 20 producers for all the other teams. And so the cooperation within that team over development is that they are basically the glue between all the different teams. So they handle the priorities of all the things that are coming out of QA. But if you're talking specifically about in the end there with the large amount of issues coming out of it, so each different producer from each different department was looking at a tab inside the file for their specific team. They would go over it and say, like, this needs to go back to QA, this needs to go to the development team, or this we're not doing anymore before release. So they were handling the priority basically of all those incoming issues at the end.
Yeah, sure. I'm more precisely asking about metrics. Like, did you guys were basing it based on the user pain or whatever was the indicator of? Because with this many permutations, as you mentioned, I can imagine that the sheer number of tickets demands from you some additional layer of, okay, how we determine what's really, really important.
Yeah. So within that file, they would tag things that would have to go to Jira, and Jira was the main source of setting the priority. So the highest issues that would end up in Jira on their priority would go into the next sprint. So producers basically had full control over what would come from the feedback into Jira and into the development team's sprints.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I have two questions. The first one is, I would like to know what are the responsibilities of your QA leads, and were they testing game as well, or were they focusing on other things? And the second question is, it's not directly linked to your presentations, but who in Larian is responsible for QA development and growth of their skill? Who is their manager? Thank you.
The first question about what do leads do is we try to maintain a, I'd say 70-30 or 60-40 split between them doing actual management tasks, and so that involves like performance and development, so guiding people through the trajectory of junior, intermediate, senior, or other trajectories within the team. So I'd say 30 to 40% of their time goes to that, but it depends on which phase of the project we're in. The other so the remaining percentage of their time goes to actually helping out in the pipeline, because we believe that leads need to be in touch with what they're doing, what their team members are doing, so they need to be able to understand the workflows of the people that they're following up with. So that's the split that we usually look for. And training and workflows, like I'm the head of QA, but we decide that as a team usually what we need to work on. I mean, there's a vision from all directors and heads in our company that say like, this is what we're working towards, or this is how we're going to adapt to the project. But usually, at least within QA, and I think within a lot of the other disciplines, that's something that the overall team management decides on how the team needs to be trained.
Thank you.
I have a question. Thank you for a great talk and magnificent game. My question is, what was your approach to classifying bugs, especially in terms of severity and area? Was it strongly connected to priority, or was QA have this power to suggesting what is a priority or just judging severity? And literally in Jira, as you used, what was your values in terms of using area, priorities, severities?
In terms of, we do have the split between severity and priority. So in priority we have, if I remember correctly, you have must fix blocker crashes. Those are the top ones. Then you have major, minor in priority. And in severity, there are similar levels, but I think there are only 3. And the 2 of those combined usually decide whether or not something is very urgent or less urgent. But the way the filtering works is that, so it's part of the management part of the leads. So they are usually the filter for their local team. So all the issues that get reported on Jira first go to the lead. The lead assigns it to the correct person in the development team, and there the producer again goes over the priority, but it's already set by our QA team actually. So they set the priority first, but the the producer from the other teams can change that or assign it to a sprint. So they still decide what the priority actually is, but usually it's already set by QA. And I don't think there's usually I'd say 85 to 90% of the time it's not changed anymore, unless of course you probably know that since the development cycle is so long, if you report a bug that a year ago was major, it could end up being, I mean, those change over time, obviously, depending on the phase of the project that you're in.
Thanks for your lecture. It was really nice to hear some QA stuff on Digital Dragons. Hope I will hear more in the future. And I have a question for you about post-release. What is your strategy for checking if hotfix and major patches are ready to release? And also, from my point of view, do you have any feedback for other QA leads how to make sure that player which may be not all players are on the same place in the game where the patch come,
yeah,
and how to make sure they are safe to continue their adventure.
Yeah, so that's two-part answer, I think. One part of the answer is that we have automated save game compatibility testing. So we have a large pool because we have cross-save, actually, which was a saving grace for this system. We have cross-save, and so we have access anonymously to a lot of player saves and internal saves from QA as well. So they are testing on the pre-release patch, changing the save game, and also running this through the automatic save game compatibility tester. But we have a large pool of player saves, actually, that we automatically download, load into the system, see if they work, and then it spits out results if they can actually just load. But that's simply loading. Like you say, it's still dangerous. You could have a valid save game being loaded, but then there's an issue 30 minutes or further into the game. So what we do is we try to approach it from several different angles. So we have the automatic one. We have players actually just testers loading the save game and then playing for half an hour or an hour, seeing if the quests are still able to complete. But I think part of that answer lies in the other development tools. The other development teams, like the scripting team, is obviously a big help there because they have their own fail safes and they have their own list of what they can and cannot change before it goes into a patch. Scripting is usually, like you correctly mentioned, the most dangerous part to change in any patch, but a hotfix specifically. The scripting team helps, the automation helps, because sometimes we have a turnaround of only a couple of days to issue a hotfix, so we try to focus on that one thing with as many tools as we have at our disposal. But in the end, the priority of getting something out very quickly to players and helping them is a balance against how much time we have left to test it.
Thank you very much for your talk, and especially for the Tech QA appreciation. As a Tech QA myself, I really found it very, very wholesome. But my question is very much related. I'm wondering about how you tackled performance issues, especially in relation to Stadia and consoles, where performance and optimization is extremely important. How did you establish like a pipeline for reporting performance issues, and how did you get people to actually own up and be responsible for those performance issues and eventually fix them?
Yeah, that last one is indeed a difficult pain point sometimes, but we do have, like on our QA portal that I mentioned, I actually don't have a screenshot of but the landing page for our QA portal is the benchmarking page, which tracks automatic performance captures, and TechQA is strongly involved in this. They actually wrote something called Badger Mark, which is used by a lot of development teams, not just the engine and gameplay team. So it automatically runs scripts throughout the game and spits out per API what the performance is, what the memory usage is. So we do have tracking like that, but like you say, sometimes it's difficult tracking down an exact source of why performance or memory went up. So we don't have a typical owner for that, but we are trying to fix that in the future to have more ownership about this with our internal team structure. But it does make some things easier because there's a daily generation of those performance stats. You can actually look at something and say like, oh, there's a big spike here, and there's only been this amount of change lists within Perforce that have affected performance. So the tracking it down usually can happen quite quickly if it's caught fast enough.
Hey, so I have a question regarding the embedded support for the QA team, because more and more games are releasing like in the early access. So looking back, would you put like the support member earlier into the production to the team? Because this, from my experience, this helps a lot to gather the information and filter the data that you are getting from the players.
How do you mean exactly?
When would you add like the support member to the QA team? That's like, and do you think it's valuable like from the get-go or just going later on to the production?
But what do you mean exactly with the support member? From the tech support?
Yeah, the tech support.
So we have 3 internal, what I would define as pure tech support, and they mostly focus on answering tickets from players. And then we have something that we internally call support QA, who act as the link between the issues that are coming in from tech support, and they are translating or retesting things that players are reporting. So they're not strongly embedded within the development teams, but they are within the QA team, basically the filter of what goes from tech support to the gameplay team. And they mostly deal with the support issues themselves, but not with the players, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's enough. Thank you very much.
Hello. First of all, I totally agree that support should be included under the umbrella of QA. And yeah, we are doing that in our place, and I think that's the best idea we should come up with. And about that, processing huge amount of tickets, I can share with you some my tips and tricks, so we can catch up later if you want. But actually, my question is more related to your connections with community team and support team right now, especially that are you proactively seeking opinions from your player base, like do you have maybe some created community of playtesters from the community, or the feedback that is coming to you is purely from either social media or Steam forums or your ticket manager? And
we do a combination of all of those. So we still have some people doing actual, I wouldn't call it playtesting, but they test the new features that are going into our next patch. So that's internal feedback. Then we have the community team inside publishing that's not, I wouldn't say proactively asking for feedback, but they gather everything from social media forums into a weekly report that says, like, the community has this strong feelings about this, and this can range from issues that affect QA to overall feedback on the game, obviously, because we have had content changes to the game that either were liked or disliked by the community, so we always get reports on that. So we try to approach it from different angles, like you mentioned. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, thank you for your insightful presentation. I'm really curious about this 1 month decision about making release 1 month earlier and what it made for the whole company, but also for the QA team, because I believe near the release you had many things on the plate and you needed to sacrifice something. What it was?
Yeah. So the month earlier release was indeed difficult for the QA team, but in the end, I'd say that month was kind of already calculated in, because we had earlier decided that it would be in September. So the PC was always at a more stable overall place than the console platforms. So it put a lot of pressure on QA for sure, but it's like we had that, I wouldn't call it a buffer, but it was in the planning, because you have to deal with submission and everything, like for PlayStation and Xbox, that you have this buffer window of, I'd say, 4 to 6 weeks anyway. But still, it wasn't the ideal scenario, because the issues that were being found during that month of August on PC should have been caught and only released technically in September, because we didn't want to affect players that much. But in the end, it turned out very positively, but it was a big risk for sure to move up the release dates. I think it's the first time in history that we moved the release date up instead of down. So,
congratulations. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I have 2 questions. The first one is actually how many of these over 74,000 bugs managed to fix? How many of them were actually fixed up until now?
Yeah.
And the second one is to what extent the QA is engaged in the design process when it comes to, you know, quests, features, and the whole content in general?
I don't know if I should answer that question about the 74,000, because I could be very wrong, but my best guess would be 2/3 that are fixed, and a lot of them, the remaining ones, are the backlog, I would say. So it's not like they're super urgent. We're a year after release, so it's not like there are many big issues left anymore, but it's still, we don't want to just throw them away. We still want to have and fix those things for the community, because some of them, they will affect a lesser chunk of the amount of people, but still, they're still there. So my best guess is 2/3, and there's a lot of lower priority in the remaining ones. As for the incorporation in design, we have a lot of, I don't know if you followed the cycle of how we did early access, a lot of features, classes and everything, content updates were added. So anytime we did a big patch at the beginning of the cycle, QA would already be giving feedback for months on the thing that would be in the patch 6 months later. So they are definitely, for specific design things like a class or major content update, they're always included very early, and they give large feedback documents. What happens with that feedback is obviously up to the team itself, but there's a lot of interactions going on back and forth definitely between the QA team and design team.
Okay, and QA is like engaged in meetings. They're invited to meetings and etc. So they're like a strongly embedded part of the team.
Yes, and we try to we're trying to take that a step further as we go into next projects to really embed QA into sound, into level design, into art. So we try to involve them as early as possible, but like I said in one of my slides, the balance there needs to be correct, because involving them too soon also doesn't always make sense, but we're trying to fine-tune that for each team, to adapt it to their needs, basically. But for each team, we are trying to incorporate them as soon as makes sense to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, designers cooperate with the QA at the beginning of the design phase?
Sometimes, like if you're talking about really ideation phase, sometimes there's a request for feedback, but QA is not always involved from the very beginning of making documents, no. But once ideas solidify, because we have I don't know, there was a part in Sven's presentation also that mentioned too many cooks. That goes for both inside the team as for QA. We don't want too many people giving too much feedback, but once an idea is decided from like, we're going to put this into the game, then there will definitely be feedback.
Thank you, Octaaf.
Right, thank you.